New fire in the heart of New York as America's terror continues.
Survivors found, rescuers go into the ruins of the World Trade Center.
Captured on camera, the first plane attack that brought carnage to New York.
Devastation at the Pentagon. 5 floors collapsed. There are few survivors.
America may have been singled out by these terrorists, but their attack is aimed at all of us.
The Prime Minister says Britons have been caught in the attacks.
Sky News with Alan King and Anna Botting.
Hello, good afternoon. The World Financial Center in New York is on fire. The building is part of the complex around the World Trade Center. It's believed that it spread from one of the fires that engulfed the Twin Towers yesterday. Rescuers have pulled several survivors from the rubble of the collapsed building. Many have been using mobile phone calls to contact the outside world. Well, the loss of life in the terrorist attacks is said to be horrendous, with more than 10,000 people still missing. President Bush has vowed to take revenge. Tony Blair has had a 20-minute conversation with Mr. Bush, and here Parliament is to be recalled on Friday.
4.5 minutes.
It is a skyline which is barely believable. Today, clouds hang where the Twin Towers of the World Trade Center stood till yesterday. It's an image now consigned to memory. This once bustling city has been brought to a standstill by the terrorist attack. The silence on the streets today is punctuated only by the rescue workers still searching for survivors. They know there are people alive here. Some trapped beneath the rubble have used their mobile phones to call for help. Staff at local hospitals have been at full stretch throughout the night, dealing with the thousands of people who've been seriously injured. Many have major burns. Volunteers from across America have responded to appeals for help.
We want to first thank all New Yorkers and people from literally throughout the world who came to the hospital yesterday to volunteer their services. Doctors, nurses, just people off the street. We had over 800 people in line at one point in time to give blood.
They still hold out hope of pulling survivors from the debris, but there's little doubt now that thousands have been killed. It's a reality the mayor of New York, who's been out on the city streets, can barely comprehend.
It's terrible. I mean, the damage is terrible. People are doing everything that they can to rescue as many people as possible, and this is going to be a long-term effort. So I just wanted to make sure that everything is here that could be here, and it is. So we just pray to God that we can save a few people.
Shock and disbelief are fast turning to anger and calls for revenge. America regards this as an act of war by terrorists using hijacked planes as their weapons, planes packed with passengers. Their targets were carefully chosen, striking first at the financial heart of America. Many of the workers inside the World Trade Center would have had little chance of escape. Time simply ran out. Faced with a massive fireball which was spreading rapidly down the building, many jumped from the windows. Minutes after the first tower collapsed, the second followed. The streets below were turned into a terror zone at the height of the rush hour. As the appalling scenes were being beamed around the world, another hijacked plane was flown into the symbol of America's might, the Pentagon in Washington. Up to 800 are feared dead. Later, a fourth plane crashed in Pennsylvania. Its target is thought to have been Camp David. In an act of defiance, the Pentagon will reopen today, and President Bush has vowed to avenge the terrorists. He's meeting with members of Congress to decide how to respond. But his Secretary of State has made it perfectly clear that America will act as if this is a war.
and we've got to respond in the sense that it isn't going to be solved with a single counterattack against one individual. It's going to be a long-term conflict, and it's going to be fought on many fronts: the military front, the intelligence front, the law enforcement front, the diplomatic front. And it's a war not just against the United States, it's a war against civilization.
It was a day full of terrifying images, a day that will never be forgotten. Now America is counting the cost. This morning, the rescue efforts continue as the political leaders decide what action they should take. The last 24 hours have shown all too graphically how vulnerable any country is to terrorist attack, even the most powerful. The strike against America was a strike against freedom and democracy right around the world. Michelle Clifford, Sky News.
Well, just about 10 minutes since the first attack, and 24 hours, in fact, since President Bush was told about the attack on the World Trade Center. We can cross live to Washington, our U.S. correspondent Keith Graves. Keith, we know the Pentagon is reopening, but one wonders exactly what is like inside and what is going on in there.
Yeah, parts of it are reopening, yes, certainly, but there was an off-the-camera briefing just a few minutes ago by the man, and a very experienced man he is. He, for example, was one of the first into the Oklahoma City building when that was blown up, who is leading the teams who first went into that building yesterday. It took 3 hours because of the fire before they could get in. And he has just briefed reporters, so which is the first time we've had an account of what it's like in that building. In fact, you can't see it because it's no longer on fire, but it's about 3 miles over there, over my shoulder, the Pentagon, with maybe up to 800 bodies still inside there. What he says is that inside the bit of the building that was struck, it is totally devastated in there, he says. They're having to shore it up as they try and move in, because 5 floors have been destroyed and it is in imminent danger of collapsing. He says it's very dangerous in there indeed. It's still smoldering from the fire, which is making life more difficult. They're having problems trying to put out the smoldering debris, which is the lowest level of the destruction, because they don't want to loosen it, to destabilize it, because it could bring the whole building down on top of them. He says so far they have found 13 dead bodies in there. Don't forget, there's a suggestion there may be 800 altogether, and he says depressingly that, unlike in New York, here at the Pentagon they have heard no or found no signs that anybody has survived.
Now, Keith, it is obviously, and we can see clearly from the pictures, a huge building. Although the devastation is immense where it's taking place, it's only a small section of the building. Do we know what facilities that section housed and what part of the American military machine has been affected?
No, we don't. They keep that sort of thing very secret, obviously, because if you say this particular part of the building houses this particular section, like Air Force planning or something like that, then you're telling a potential terrorist where a target he might want to strike is. And so we don't know exactly what was struck. We are assuming, but we've not been told officially, that a considerable number, maybe a majority of the people who were dead were military officers. I think that's perhaps a common sense conclusion that we can draw. But we don't know whether this is a vital part of the building. We don't know whether any of the people who were killed were, for example, vital intelligence officers or people in top secret positions. We haven't been told that, and it is possible for very obvious reasons that we will not be told that. What we do know is that the Secretary for Defense was in the building when it happened. He came out of the building apparently and tried to help with the rescue. He was then taken by his security men back into the building, and certainly the deep war room beneath the building, which was originally constructed to withstand a nuclear attack, was never damaged or affected. So even if the rest of the building was affected, they could go down there and say the Pentagon is still operational.
Indeed. I mean, the attack on New York, appalling though it was not on a military target, so it's in a way not quite so surprising that it could be carried out. But the Pentagon, of course, the ultimate military target, it seems surprising that there was no protection against this sort of attack, or apparently none.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that we had always been told, and we assumed, therefore, that the Pentagon, such a vast and obvious target, was protected by missiles that were on the roof. Now, we are told, and indeed we know this is true, that there are missiles, small surface-to-air missiles, on the roof of the White House. The fact is that if that aircraft which went into the Pentagon had been maybe 100, 150 feet higher, he would have skimmed across the Pentagon, he would have skimmed across the Potomac River with nothing to stop him, of course. He would have skimmed across the park with nothing but trees, and literally within seconds of him hitting the Pentagon, if he kept going a bit higher, he would have been into the White House. Now, President Bush was not there, but nonetheless, you can imagine what a symbol that would have been if it had been destroyed. And it's difficult to imagine how, if he had missed the roof of the Pentagon and he was still in the air at that point, how those missiles could have been deployed and shot him down. A large aircraft traveling at full throttle, he would certainly have reached the White House. So I guess there are questions being asked there about security at the White House.
Now, Keith, if we may, moving on to New York, we now know 24 hours after the attack, there's yet another fire, this time in the World Financial Center. Have you got any more from where you are about that?
Yeah, this is a building which, not to be confused with the World Trade Center, which of course no longer exists. Next to that, adjacent to that, is the World Financial Center. 4 towers, not as tall, they were empty. Now, they were damaged, destabilized, we're told yesterday, by what happened virtually next door. That building, those buildings burst into flames about an hour ago, and there is a fire burning there, which is obviously hindering the attempts of the rescuers to get inside the World Trade Center, where they have already found a small number of people still alive. Inside the World Financial Center, and I'm just referring to my notes, it's the headquarters, I'm told, of American Express, of Merrill Lynch, of Dow Jones. There are hundreds of other offices, businesses there associated with the business and financial world. There are about 50 shops and restaurants there, so that's a major center all on its own that was empty at the time, no suggestion of more casualties, but that is now on fire, really in the aftermath, no suggestion that there's a separate incident in the aftermath of what happened yesterday. They switched off all the electricity yesterday in the whole of Manhattan to try and ensure that there were no fires started by electricity. We don't know exactly how the fire started. All we know is, and you've probably seen the pictures, that it is on fire.
Keith, for the moment, thank you very much indeed for that update. Keith Graves there in Washington.
Well, reverberations, of course, from this around the world. We're hearing from Germany that it's evacuated its foreign ministry in Berlin after a bomb threat following the massive attacks, of course, on the United States 24 hours ago. The foreign ministry is housed in the former Reichsbank building in Berlin. But as you can see, the scene from Lower Manhattan is still on fire. The World Financial Center, as Keith Graves was describing, is burning now. Well, back here in the UK, Parliament is to be recalled on Friday for an emergency debate. The Prime Minister has said that a substantial number of Britons are likely to have been caught in the carnage, particularly in New York. Mr. Blair has had a 20-minute telephone conversation with President Bush. The Foreign Secretary has gone to Brussels for an emergency meeting of European foreign ministers.